Thanks for coming, and I think I'm between you and lunch. My name's Steve Wallace. I work in Internet2, and I'm going to be describing a tool that we have built with CADA to help people plan their RPKI-ROAs. What is a ROA and why is it useful? I'm going to leave that to a session later today, this room 140. Aaron is going to talk about that. The tool is called the ROA Planner, and it has a pretty simple URL, roa-planner.internet2.edu. It's an experimental service, and the first time you use it, you'll get a disclaimer, which you should read. This is part of a larger project called Root Beer. This is an NSF-funded project of CADA and Internet2 and CADA are partnering on delivering the products of the project. Essentially, sort of the 30,000-foot view is Root Beer's aim is to ensure that R&E traffic, and only R&E traffic, stays on R&E infrastructure. And one way to think about this is routing security for R&E. And there'll be talk more about Root Beer, same room, at 2:40. And then for those of you who will attend the connector BOF, there'll be some information there. So we've actually spent a lot of time helping different organizations with their ROA planning. And I was trying to come up with a number. It's been dozens of individual organizations that we've helped with their ROAs. And just so you know, we're willing to do this for any organization that's connected to Internet2. And when I mean this, we'll sit down on a Zoom call and even go to the step of when they're ready to create a ROA within the Aaron dashboard, we'll be on the Zoom and overlook what they're doing and just give a second set of eyes to make sure that they're doing what they intend to do. Now, while most of the time, most organizations have fairly simple ROAs. It's literally you're filling out a form, there's 3 entries in the form, and you're done. That's most of the time. Every now and then, it's more complicated than that. And what we've discovered is it's important, and it can take some assistance for an organization to understand, am I in the simple bucket, or do I need to think about this a little bit more? And this tool, we hope, will help with that. So what could make a ROA complex, or why might you need multiple ROAs for a single IP network? Some sites have cold site facilities, in other words, a backup facility, a disaster recovery facility, and they may use their IP address space at that disaster facility, and they may announce that space differently to the internet than they normally do. And maybe they don't do it all the time. Maybe when that facility gets turned on during an event, there's a new route in the internet that is a route for their IP network space, but that route looks different in some way. And so maybe there needs to be a ROA to accommodate their normal route, plus this additional route when they have to engage this facility. Various cloud-based DDoS scrubbing services can make the creation of ROAs a little more complicated. We've seen cases where we sit down to help someone plan a ROA, and we notice evidence that occasionally, maybe every summer, for example, they use parts of their IP address space from somewhere else, and that route looks a little bit differently, and they'll say, oh yeah, we have an event at the fair, or something like that, and we actually use our IP space there and announce it differently. And so the problem is things happen different times of the year, and the people who are going to create the ROA may not be, they may forget, they just may not be aware that those events take place. Sometimes you want to preserve the capability to do some traffic engineering. In other words, you might want to preserve the capability to announce more specifics as part of your procedure for engineering which links carry what traffic. And sometimes you need a ROA to accommodate that. If you plan to bring your own IP space to the cloud, bring your own IP, the cloud providers, at least the ones that I'm aware of, and that would include Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, and Google, They have a nice facility to do this, but it requires ROAs for all of those IP addresses. And then another interesting case is, and we're going to show an example of this, when the IP address holder, and I'll give you an example, in the case of Internet2, we hold a /32 IPv6 block, and then we subassign that block to other organizations for their use. And we've been doing that for a long time, for probably a couple decades. And our records aren't maybe as complete as we like. And so if we want to make ROAs for all of those, it's nice to have a tool that will help us figure out what's needed. So here's the kind of data we gather to help us plan ROAs. We look at how the network is currently announced, and then we look at its history of being announced. We look at what are the regional internet registry reassignments, those records, and then we look at the routing, internet routing registry route objects as indications that, oh, there may be a route, maybe we're not seeing it right now, but there may be a route that would be consistent with a route object in an IRR. So what the ROA planner does is after you enter a prefix that you want analyzed, it reaches out, and it reaches out to RIPESTAT and route views to get current and past network announcements. We include RIPESTAT to get, they provide a convenient API to get the history and a good long history of what they've seen. And route views ensures that, one of the things route views does, route views ensures that if we're announcing more specifics into the R&E infrastructure, we're going to catch that, and we won't miss that because it's not as visible outside the R&E infrastructure. This tool can be used by people in or out of the infrastructure, so it doesn't matter. It's going to go, this tool's going to go get data like that, and it's going to try and calculate the ROAs required to cover all of these things as though they represented routes that might occur today. So if there was a route in the past, or if there was an IRR route object, it's going to assume that those could be routes today, and it's going to calculate the ROAs to cover them all. When it presents you this information in a table, you can deselect which pieces of information you want to remove from its calculation. So maybe there's some IRR objects that were created for another project, and maybe they aren't involved anymore and they just haven't been cleaned up. Well, you can say, don't take that one into account when you're doing this calculation. Or you can say, for example, yeah, old routes that were over a year ago, let's not use those as examples from which to determine what ROAs to create. So I'm going to do a couple demos. There's part of the demo I'm not going to do because the wireless in here has been a little variable. So I'm going to describe a couple things and just show you how it would work, but not really touch the button. So this is the first time you use the ROA planner, you will get a disclaimer, and we should talk just a moment about why you're getting the disclaimer. If you create a ROA incorrectly, you can have an immediate effect on the reachability of that network from the internet. Can be within minutes. Certainly something bad will happen within an hour or two. So it's something that you want to be thoughtful, and this tool should be helpful, but it's not perfect. And so you need to keep that in mind. It's a tool to help you plan your ROAs, but it does a pretty good job. So you get that disclaimer, you have to click through it, and you may see that every month or so. If you have, between a month not using the ROA planner, you go back to it, I think it shows you the disclaimer again. You put in at the top the prefix, and you hit the Analyze button. I've already done that, so it's populated what's below. And you basically get a table of information and some tabs to show you what ROAs would be needed. So the first one I picked is one where there are no ROAs needed. So this is, I used to work at Indiana University, and when somebody asked me to type an IP prefix, there's one that just types itself from my hands, and it's one of IU's networks. and IU has created ROAs to cover all of the announcements from their network. So in this case, it says basically the ROA planning information is this table, and again, this information came from Ripestat, errands, whois, and route views, and it's showing us routing history, routing objects, and it's basically saying all of these, if you look at the current global ROA table, are all valid. So these are all covered. There are no ROAs to make. If you go up here, normally you click on that tab, and it would give you a list of ROAs to create, but there are none. No ROAs needed. So this is just a good example of some. Now, the ROA tool may be useful for other things too, if you kind of want to look at the routing history in a nice, convenient way, in a way that structures the IP addresses so that you can see the hierarchy. That's nice. It also gives you, there are a handful of other things on here. It makes it easy to see the point of contacts for an allocation or sub-allocation, and you can copy those emails to the clipboard. So let's say, well, I'll show you an example where we'll use that next. You can apply filters to this data. In other words, you can individually uncheck these items. It's the unchecking I don't want to do because that will force it to go back to the server, and given our network, it's not something I'm going to demo. But anyway, you can individually deselect rows and say, don't consider this row, or you can pick a number of days old for either the routing history or the IRR sources or both and have it automatically uncheck those. There's one other feature. In this particular case, it's probably not very useful because these are all covered, but you can go ahead and when it shows the status here, these are all valid. That's looking at the actual global ROA table. But you can, in this interface, you can add another ROA and see how that would be evaluated in this table. So I'll put one that I know won't work very well. I'll say its origin is AS1, and no, we don't see AS1 as an origin for any of these routes. And I'll use the same prefix. And I'll say apply. And now you notice there's an existing ROA for each of these that says valid. And then there's a proposed ROA, and in this case it says invalid. So if some of them said unknown or invalid and you want to play with, well, what row would it take to turn those, you can go ahead and put in and test it. So let's go to a more interesting one. And I've promised my boss this is the last time I'll use this because I actually need to use my tool here to make these ROAs. So this is part of Internet2's IPv6 space that we've reallocated to people within Internet, organizations within Internet2 that was an easy way for them to get v6 space and to make use of it. We've created ROAs for a lot of this space, but for a lot of this space, we haven't done that. And so the table for this is pretty long. There's a lot of routing history. There's a lot of IRR objects. When you look, we've swapped the reallocations. So errands, whois information has like point of contacts for these other organizations. So if, for example, on this row here, if there's no ROA for this, so what I can see is the prefixes that sit underneath this /40, they're not found. So there's no ROA for those. And I probably want to let the people who are using this know I intend to create a ROA for this space. They can't create the ROA. The holder of the IP space, which is Internet2, has to create it. So I can look at the point of contacts, and I can say, okay, I'll just copy that email address. I'll put that in my note. When I'm sending them a note saying, hey, I just want you to know, unless you have an objection at this date and time, we're going to create a ROA to further protect your route. There are a lot of them where we need to do this, as you can see. There's also another feature. So when we see a route object that has Radware's origin AS, as the origin AS for that route, that tells us that that network is being protected by Radware's DDoS scrubbing service. And because I don't have an hour and a half to just explain this one thing, the short story is, in cases like this, it really requires a conversation with multiple parties to determine what the correct ROA is. There's no one party that would know. It's kind of a weird thing, but we do flag them and we put a note in saying this is, and if you click on this, it gives you a little bit of background why this is highlighted and what the next step should be. So in this case, this is part of the sub-allocation from Mid-Atlantic Crossroads, and I'd want to talk to them and ask them how they've implemented Radware's DDoS scrubbing service. And once I talk to them, then I would get to talk to Virginia Tech and have a good conversation about them, exactly what ROAs they would need. Now, they might be able to figure that out too, but this is I'll be creating these ROAs for this space, and it just gives me more information to do that. So if you look through this whole list, it's not too long. Some stuff's covered, some stuff's not covered. But if you go up to the top, and if I leave everything checked, if I say, yeah, use all that information and just show me the ROAs, it shows you the ROAs in two different formats. One is multi-prefix ROAs. So a multi-prefix ROA is a ROA that for a given AS, you can list more than one prefix and max length for each of the prefixes. And that is not the official recommended practice. We recommend you do the unofficial, that you do the thing the official practices don't do. I think the official, and if you click on the link here, it will explain why we are deviating, why our recommendation is deviating from the current recommendations in the RFCs, and we believe those will change. It's just taking a little more time. So if I was not going to deselect old information here, which I could do, for some of this information is old enough they probably don't need a ROA, but if I just wanted to see the ROAs I need, I can go to this tab and it lists for each row, it lists an AS, and then some of the ASs, for example, in this case, for this AS, the row would have all of these prefixes. So these are the ROAs. You could just do this and hit bingo, you've got the ROAs to create the complete set of ROAs so that whole table would turn green and valid. If you didn't want to use the multi-prefix ROAs, it also will give you the same information in a form of a single prefix per ROA to put in. I'm considering adding to this the ability, maybe another tab that would give you something you could paste into what you're using to use the RESTful API to automate these against Aaron. Although that sounds a little dangerous, automating these, but I think some people will want to do that. So those are the basic features of this tool. It's up and available today. Using the tool doesn't harm anything, so you don't have to worry about that. Some things are really interesting. You can put in AT&T /12/8, and you have to wait half a minute or so for it to return, but you can see 1,000 lines of information and thousands of ROAs that they would need to create to cover all of it. For many of you, you put in your campus /16, and it's going to look really simple. But for some of you, it's not going to look simple, and this is a tool to help you understand. You may need more complex ROAs, and here's what they'll look like. So any questions so far? Pretty straightforward. Okay. Just for giggles, I'll show another one. Here's a /15, 15.0.0.0/10, and this is one of Hewlett-Packard's IP ranges, and they don't have any ROAs. But but boy, if they wanted to have some, all they need is 17, and they're right here. You know, we're trying to make it easier for people to create their ROAs. Now, jumping forward a little bit, the day before, Tuesday before Thanksgiving, I had scheduled to be off. We have leaves in our backyard that I need to get out of the backyard, but it rained. And so I get up early, I walk the dog, I'm having an early cup of coffee, and I had this thought. There is an aspect of how ROAs are evaluated against routes, which I see it's common for people to get wrong. It's a counterintuitive concept to begin with, and then if you're just not doing this very often, it's common for people to get wrong, including me and including my colleagues who do this. And I thought, wouldn't it be neat to build a tool? Now, back up a little bit. The ROA Planner is a couple thousand lines of Python, a couple thousand lines of HTML and JavaScript, quite a bit, almost all the JavaScript and HTML was all AI written, and a fair amount of Python was AI written. This tool, this teaching tool, I thought could just live in the browser. So it would just be a browser-side HTML, JavaScript. And having had the experience of working with AI to generate the code, I thought maybe I could just do this, just vibe code this new tool. So I started off with this one prompt. That was probably 6 a.m. in the morning. And by 4 p.m., so it took a full long day, I had the tool. Now, the tool's not super fancy, but it works. And this is, we're calling it our RPKI-ROA visualizer. And the goal of this tool is to let a user sort of experiment. They can put in the information for ROA, and they can put information in for a BGP route, and then they can say evaluate the route, and what that means is go through the route origin validation process and determine, given that information, is this going to evaluate to valid or unknown or invalid, and why? And so we created this tool. I will use this tool when I do workshops or webinars on how all this works. It's going to be a very useful tool. I'm so happy I have it. I built it in one day. I think it would have taken me a week or two if I didn't have AI, which means that it would not have been a priority sufficient for me to do this for a week or two. So this tool exists because I could do it in a day. And that really has kind of shifted how I think. There's a lot of tools I'd like to have, and now I realize the bar to getting some of those tools is much lower than it used to be, and I'm getting more comfortable doing this. And I'm a real primitive user of the tools. So this tool was done in the chatbot web interface of Gemini. I did not use a coding tool to build this. And it just, you know, like I said, it took all day to get exactly what I wanted, but it did work. And it's pretty cool. It shows when it does the calculation of whether the ROA covers the route. It shows you bit by bit. It works for v6 and v4. It shows you bit by bit, did the bits actually match up? Okay, it's covering the ROA. It checks the length, and then it checks, is the origin AS okay? You can, we'll change this a little, we'll make this max length, we'll make it max length 25. And then I go down and I can say, one of the things that, for some people it's not as obvious, if you're using max length, that means there's a range of prefixes that you need to look at, and it will show you the range. So we'll click, and it says, okay, you know, given the definition of the ROA with certain limitations, it won't produce examples longer, v4 examples longer than a 24, or v6 examples longer than I think a 48, and it will only produce 200 of them. If they're more than 200, it just stops at the 200. But it shows you a list of ones that would match. So this tool is available now too, and it's a total client-side tool. Everything's happening in your browser. And we look forward to building more tools like this to help people manage their ROAs, kind of part of the bigger root beer project, which is to ensure that there's good routing security for the global RNE routing environment. So that's what I had to show you. Any questions?
No, there we got a mic. When you did the, showed the IPv6 one for Internet2, I don't think it had the 32 as suggested.
You don't think it had the what?
The root, the 2001.468/32.
That first line?
Yeah. As a suggested ROA when you did the suggestions.
Okay, so do we have a route? Yeah, we have a route.
I don't know. Do we have a route? Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's at the bottom.
Right there.
Ah, okay.
It's there. Didn't miss it.
Okay. Any other questions for Steve? All right. Thanks. Let's thank. Oh, hold on. We got one.
Oh. The PI on the project.
It's a straight man question. So I can imagine if it were me doing it, I'd be nervous to do this in real time. Is there an online chat environment where people are doing this and people could go ask questions just to double check and get feedback? I think you mentioned some Discord thing, but I don't know if you've actually used it or what your opinion, would you recommend it?
Could you, are you saying like office hours to help people do this?
Or that.
Yeah.
Or that.
Yeah, so.
But like, because that's kind of, you have to commit to that, and if there's 1,000 people on some Discord server that we could point people at, is it another option, or is it, obviously use at your own risk, but.
So I'm very mindful that if you get this wrong, bad things can happen. And I've helped a bunch of people, a lot of people do this. And so far, this has not happened. You know, I worry about, I do enough of them, one of these days, something might go wrong. What I prefer to do, and what I'm happy to do, is either during office hours, if you're comfortable with other people seeing what's going on, I'm happy to walk you through doing it, creating the ROAs in Aaron's online testing environment. So you can do it there, and it doesn't really do anything. So you can practice there, and then maybe, okay, go ahead and do it in the online production environment. I'm agreeable for those who want to create them off hours. I will schedule a meeting with you at 2 o'clock on a Sunday morning if that's when you need to do it, because that's your process. And what I do is you share your screen with me, we go over the data together, and you create the ROA, you know, while I'm there watching. That's not for everybody, but you know, the thing is, even if you're the BGP network engineer for the network, this is something you might do once in your career and never again, and so it feels uncomfortable because the first time you do it, it has consequences. And so we want to give you tools so that if you want to do it yourself, you've got good tools to better understand, is this going to be hard or easy? At the same time, really, so far, my schedule has not been overwhelmed, and if it is, that is success. As a community, we're pretty far behind. So I measure for V4 the percentage of IP addresses of the networks that connect to Internet2 that are covered and protected by ROAs, and it's about 34%. That's better, but that's opposed to well over 50% for the rest of the Internet. And I'll talk more about the dangers and exactly how this works during the Aaron presentation after lunch. Any other questions?
All right, lunchtime.
Thank you.
Thank you, speaker.